Okay, so let's talk about translocations real quick. So, what is a translocation? There is a chromosome, and on the chromosome, there are different genes. Let's say gene A is here, gene B is here. Different regions of the chromosome will be highly active and highly transcribed. So, let's say gene A is usually highly transcribed, gene B is not. However, if gene B switches with gene A, now the region of gene A is still going to be activated quite a lot, but now it's not gene A anymore, it's gene B. So gene B is going to be activated. So by the same logic, let's first have a little paradigm going on. Gene A, that's usually highly active in translocations. Normally, the gene chromosome 14 is what is high normally, because this is in B cells what codes for the immunoglobulin heavy chain of antibodies. And of course, if you're constantly activating this, you must be high in immunoglobulin heavy chain. So if this gets switched for a less active but more virulent, damaging gene, you're going to have some sort of problem. This is what we have visible translocations with. So with that in mind, let's move on to what I have in terms of mnemonics. So there are 4 translocations: follicular lymphoma, Burkitt lymphoma, Malt lymphoma, and mantle cell lymphoma. And there's a few good and bad prognosis types of acute lymphocytic leukemia that I want to talk about. But first, the way the mnemonic works is when I say the word, whatever my mind latches onto first is what I'm going to go with, so I can freely associate the translocation and possibly the gene to it. So when I think of follicular lymphoma, the first thing that pops out into my mind is follicular lymphoma. Follicular makes me think of 14. So 14 plus what? Plus 4 equals 18. So I just got it right there. 14, 18 is the translocation for follicular lymphoma. And the way I can remember this is that just remember the 4, right? Just stress that 4 in your mind and you'll get it. And I don't really have a good mnemonic to remember what the gene for 18 is, but just remember that it is BCL2, and that should be okay. You should be able to remember that. And remember the other one, 14, that I also talked about, is the immunoglobulin heavy chain. So now if we talk about Burkitt lymphoma, Burkitt lymphoma is the way I think about it, kid. And when I think of a kid, I think of a preteen. I don't think of a teenager at all. So I'm still going to think this dude's less than 10. So 8 years old. 8 is the lowest number in a translocation you'll ever deal with. And it's really hallmark for Burkitt lymphoma, right? 8, and what will it translocate with? Something that's highly expressed, right? And the chromosome that's highly expressed, we know, is what? It's 14, right? That codes for immunoglobulin heavy chain. So I just got it. Burkitt lymphoma, I think kid, so that must mean 8, right? And what does it replace with? What does it replace? It replaces 14. So I just got 814 for Burkitt lymphoma. And the gene that you need to know that chromosome 8 codes for is c-MYC, and that's pretty high yield for Burkitt lymphoma, which is associated with Epstein-Barr virus. Now, when I think of malt lymphoma, what do I think of? I think of malt, and I think malt is alcohol. That's where my mind goes. And when do you drink alcohol? When you are an adult. And when are you considered an adult? You are 18 years old when you're considered an adult. I don't care what any other country says. You are 18, you are an adult, you're no longer a kid. So, what is this going to translocate with this? You might be inclined to think 14, but remember, we already filled 14, 18 translocation with what? Follicular lymphoma, right? Follicular lymphoma. So it can't be that, it has to be something else. And the only other thing it can be is 11. And there's no real great way to remember this, but just remember that malt lymphoma is unique in that it doesn't translocate with chromosome 14. So you can maybe think about this in that when you are turning 18, you're trying to find a unique identity or whatever mumbo jumbo you want to think of. But malt lymphoma, malt alcohol, you can drink at 18, ban 18. It's not follicular lymphoma, so it must be 11, 14. Done. So now on to mantle cell lymphoma. Mantle cell lymphoma, it's pretty easy. Mantle cell. C-E-L-L, nah. C-E-1-1. So 1-1, immediately you got the 11. What is this most commonly going to translocate with? 14. Done. Nothing unique about this. Good. But think about mantle cell lymphoma in the way that you remember we all watched that really crappy movie called The Core, where they essentially are on this sort of space shuttle drilling towards the mantle. We'll think of it not really drilling, but more like cycling towards the mantle, right? So cycling D1 is the gene that is coded by 11. So now you know all the chromosomes coded for the genes. So now let's talk about the last two translocations on this list. They are essentially the two prognoses of acute lymphocytic leukemia, also known as ALL. So the good prognosis is associated with young people, 2 to 10 years old. It is associated with pre-B cells, right? B cells. And the translocation is 1221. For the adverse, the bad prognosis of ALL, it is associated with teenagers and young adults. It's associated with T cells, right? T cells, and chromosome location translocation is 922. And so how are we going to remember this? Well, let's move on to the good prognosis. The good prognosis, we know it's associated with B cells. Even if you can't remember this, think good prognosis, then bad prognosis, alphabetical, B cell, T cell, done. So B cell, think B for babies. Again, it's affecting 2 to 10 years old, so B for babies. And what do babies play with? They play with little pendulums and toys, right? When I think of toys, I think palindrome. That seems like a really fun toy a baby would play with. So when I think about palindrome, we know palindrome is the same read forward as it is backward. So the translocation that we only know that is the same forward and backward is 1221. 1, 2, 2, 1. Same forward as same backwards, done. Now, for the adverse translocation of acute lymphocytic leukemia, you can sort of reason this out. We know T cell for teens, it does affect teenagers, so that's good. Now, the translocation is 922. We know that it's the Philadelphia chromosome that also affects CML. It's found in CML. And perhaps you can remember this in the way that this is bad because Philadelphia chromosome, teenagers, perhaps they watch a lot of hockey and Philadelphia Flyers. But the way I think I can really reason this out is that ALL, this disorder that has the bad prognosis associated with 922 chromosome, is a problem with the lymphocytic lineage of the blood cells, right? And 922 is associated with CML as well. And CML is chronic myeloid leukemia, which is associated with the myeloid progenitor cell, not the lymphoid progenitor cell. So think about it. If you have a lymphoid problem, like acute lymphocytic leukemia, and you have this translocation of 922, not only are you affecting the the lymphocytic progenitor part, but you're also affecting the whole myeloid progenitor part. So this double whammy must be a bad and most severe translocation. So that about covers it for these translocations.